This is Tell Me Something Good About Retail with Bob Phibbs, the Retail Doctor. The champion for a more human connection in retail for over 30 years as the Retail Doctor. Bob is the authority on brick-and-mortar retail across the world, who works with some of the biggest luxury brands to independent retailers of all sizes.
Hey, it's Bob Phibbs, the Retail Doc. Today, my guest is CEO and founder of Grant Blvd and Black Ivy thrift, Kimberly McGlonn. She's an experienced creative strategist, brand manager, and curator of radically inclusive teams. Her work has been funded by Beyonce and featured by Fast Company, WWD, Inc. magazine, and Shondaland. And she was Black Business Enterprise's Business Disruptor of the Year for 2022. Welcome, Kimberly.
Hello, it's so good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh my goodness, I am so thrilled to be here with you. And you're an educator and I'm an educator. Maybe we'll talk about that as well. But one of the stats that you said in a recent interview was the city of Philadelphia, where you're based, is 43% Black and only 3% are Black owned. And most of those are solopreneurs. Can you tell me about your background and how it led you to start Grant Blvd?
Yeah, no, I was a classroom teacher for 20 years. So I went to grad school. I got my PhD in curriculum and design, and then went into the classroom and was teaching these really incredible courses in English, looking at the, traditional English canon, American canon and literature, and figuring out how to help students see the voices of characters that are oftentimes not at the center. And then that led me in 2016, taking a sabbatical and traveling by myself to East Africa. And while I was there, I was spending some time with nonprofits supporting women who were HIV positive and groups that were supporting orphans from elephant populations that were experiencing just encroachment from, human population growth. And I saw this film that maybe some of your listeners have seen, 13th on Netflix by Ava DuVernay. And that kind of shifted my thinking about our economy and shifted our thinking about our democracy and about how I wanted to show up for people who oftentimes need, we think of them as second chances, but I think of them sometimes as first chances, people who are criminal systems impacted, whose lives have been impacted by the criminal system. And so I thought maybe building a business and creating jobs could be the way. And 5 years later, we are still at it.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, you are indeed. And why brick and mortar instead of online?
I think for me, it's about destination and community, and it's about the preservation of a physical experience is a major part of what I think improves the landscape of a city and the quality of life for folks in cities. And so for me, the brick and mortar is still a space that I think has a lot of potential, and it requires a lot of work. There's so much more pressure in terms of like curating activations and giving people new reasons to come into the space. But I still think that the brick and mortar has an incredible cultural value add to the landscapes of our lives. And so I'm still rooting for their survival.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Ashley Stewart was a great brand revival that realized how central they were to their communities, that whole idea of people gathering around fashion. And you and I share a similar background, I believe. You grew up with your parents that were pretty socially active as well. Isn't that correct?
They were for at least the first half of my childhood. My mother volunteered on weekends in a women's correctional facility. And so that was work that, we knew she was doing, that she was going off to Cheetah to just be a source of emotional support for women who were incarcerated. And my father was a boxer in his earlier life. And as an adult and a parent, he discovered a love for gardening. And so he privately was a food activist before that language was a part of what we talk about. And then he opened a restaurant in hopes of giving, poor folks access to fresher food on Milwaukee's North Side. So, in that way, he was thinking a lot about how to show up. And that was certainly a part of what I saw in their lives as a little girl.
No, I totally get that. My dad was head of the Toledo Council of Churches in Toledo in the 60s, and actually in Trenton as well. And he marched with King and did an awful lot of things. In fact, he was at the March on Washington in '63, and he talked
Wow.
about being at the front and King's talking, and he goes, you didn't realize that sound coming behind you sounded like a wave. It was the applause, the emotion that was so strong. And those social warriors in the 60s, I think, really set us on a different path that many of us have looked at those conversations we need to have, that maybe things that we were taught didn't quite align with reality, right? And I think that's certainly what we're discovering today.
Yeah, and I think it's a tight place for a lot of people where the narratives of where we live and what we think we're in love with are not held true for everyone, and that means that all of us have, to some extent, I think, differing relationships with America, just based on that history, but also based on how much those systems and traditions are still being preserved today. And so I understand why there's some tension there for lots of reasons. We don't all have the same invitation to be educated as to what is the notion of truth. So there's a spectrum there, and our experiences in this country in terms of our access to quality living is not equal. And so I think that is another thing that creates cultural barriers in our ability to see that our experiences of what it means to be American are very different.
Well, and as a white guy in his 60s, it's a learning experience for me as well, because my whole life you thought there was one way the world worked because that's what I saw on TV.
Yeah,
And
that
even
makes
the
sense.
Vietnam War was this thing. It's like,
Way
no,
over there.
that's over there. That has nothing to do with. And then suddenly you realize, oh my God, there's a whole different world, and my truth isn't your truth. And how do we have those conversations? And that kind of leads me to one of the things you talk about, because let's face it, you're a fashion retailer. That fashion as conversation starter. I've never heard that before. So what did you find lacking in the fashion industry that brought you to it?
So many things. I mean, I think one of the most one of the things that has really been an anchor point for my drive to use fashion as a vehicle for activism is thinking about the ways in which we've been taught to not see the myriad of negative impacts on our planet's finite resources that the industry has, and the ways we've been taught to not see that the true cost of fashion is often put off into the palms of girls and women in places that we're very disconnected from, which means that we are often paying for essentially, to some extent, certainly exploitive labor, if not free labor. And we're not taught to see that, and I get it. As Americans, our cost of living is rising so quickly that it's hard for us to conceive of needing to consider someone else's quality of life. But the reality is that, whether our neighbors are 5,000 miles away or 500 miles away or 5 feet away, we are neighbors on a shared single planet. And so for me, a call to reimagining can be kind of figured out by using fashion as a vehicle for meaningful conversation, right? You asked about the notion of the preservation of the brick and mortar space. And for me, when I look at the community for Grant Blvd and for Blk Ivy, both of those are very meaningfully integrated. And there's a lot of challenges to cultivating a meaningfully integrated space, but there are so many beauties in bringing together people who would otherwise maybe not work together, maybe not be physical neighbors, maybe not share the same racial identities or gender identities, but who share a same sense of values. And that is like, how do we take care of the quality of life for each other, and how do we protect our planet, which, there's a growing body of evidence that says that it's in a state of catastrophe.
So much to unpack there. I mean, that's what I love about talking to you, because yes, we have been taught that there is no, it's funny because on the one side, right, we're being told in retail right now, oh, it's all about sustainability. We need to be sustainable. Oh, it's all about sustainability. And then you read about some of the powerhouse fashion brands who are sending incredibly cheap product into the marketplace via direct shipments. And it's like, well, which is it? Do people care about sustainability if it doesn't have a label, we're sustainable? Or is it really that it does matter, and consumers are going to punish that? Because I think as a retail brand, it's hard to understand. I believe that we are moving more to what America probably started out with, Europe and Africa and South America, which was somebody made a garment and showed it to people and they bought it and exchanged trade. Same way with food. We're not going to necessarily have to ship it from hundreds of thousands of miles away. I don't know whether it would be hundreds of thousands of miles, but you get the idea. Same thing with fashion, that more local gives us more transparency. And that's really what you're doing with Grant Blvd, isn't it?
It is exactly what we're doing. And, from a retail perspective, what we're working through and continuing to figure out how to, invite people to participate in is a major shift into how they think about their own spending, and I think that's a challenge of retail in general, particularly retail that aspires to be sustainable, and a fashion company where, 86% of what we produce, we make right in Philadelphia. We sell it within miles of where it's produced. So this is a really, in some ways, it is a return to a much older model, like you said, of how we're thinking about supply chain. But I think one of the challenges is getting people to really believe in how and living wages. That's a challenge. So even when brands say they're sustainable, oftentimes they're still driving their margins by not taking care of their workers. And I would argue that unethical production is inherently not sustainable. So, like this is the larger change for us, is being really transparent about our pricing. When you walk into our brick and mortar, you'll see the cost formula. We are dedicating, this is what we're paying for fabrics. This is what we're paying for wages. This is where everyone starts in terms of wages. Everyone makes $15 an hour to start. That's what we start with for our employees. And, and when it comes to our competition, their margins are more significant and their prices are lower. And it's because they don't think about the planet. They know they're designing things to be worn once, thrown away, and replaced. So straight to landfill. We think about throwing things away. It doesn't mean they disappear. They just go away from us. And then we have this supply chain for people who say they care about women's rights, for people who say they care about children's rights, they care about human rights. They're buying garments that are oftentimes really sitting at odds with what they say they care about most. So this is a shift. And I'm really optimistic that while it's going to be hard for brands like Grant Blvd and Blk Ivy for now, we will essentially be the thought leaders of the new landscape.
I love that. Well, who do you see as your target customer for Grant Blvd? And how do you ensure that inclusivity with your brand?
I see our target consumer is, there are people who love art museums and art. There are people who love culture. There are people who love music. There are people who love making a statement. And at the same time, they have very busy lives. They're shapeshifters. They're parents and their aunts and their uncles and their business leaders and they're working professionals, and they have full lives. They want clothes that are going to last a long time, that are going to move with them throughout the day, right? So we have one set of garments called the denim play. It's for people who really love 100% made in America denim. And even if they don't know the story of 100% made in America, they love a raw denim. They love contrast stitching. They love quality construction. And then we have another garment set that's called the day play, which is about garments that they're supposed to feel like pajamas on the body, but look like elevated monochromatic statements that are, in some ways, they have a wide range of versatility in terms of how you can wear them and who can wear them. But they're for people who are like, yo, I'm running a company and I have these pets or these kids to take care of. My days are long. I want to look good all day long, and I don't want to be confined in the garments that I wear. And so that's who we design for, are those people. And they are people who, whether they identify as liberals or progressives, they are people who are very thoughtful consumers, and they care a lot about how their values show up in their decision making. We make garments for smart, kind people.
Wow, that's a great tagline. You should use that. I love that. I love that. So, we're recording this in the beginning of May, and right now Bud Light is going through a rather odd moment, I think, after showing for years how inclusive they were, and telling their marketing director, we need to look like we're more inclusive. They've now walked back their support of being inclusive. So what kind of conversations have you had around all of that?
I think for a lot of brands, who they are in terms of a C-suite, right? Who they are in terms of an employer are very different from who their consumers are. And I think that what Bud Light realizes is that maybe, who they are, who's buying their beer, or not necessarily who's inherently maybe marketing their beer, right? And who's making their beer may not be the people who are managing their strategic communications. And I think what they're realizing is that there's this growing tension about the collapse of civil rights and civil liberties that we don't recognize the ways in which we're participating in. And I think for a lot of people who are trying to figure out what their relationship with Bud Light or other producers are, is that they're realizing that there's that two things. Consumers will vote with their dollars. That is a fact. We are capable of voting with our dollars, and we are in the middle of a cultural war, which is centering the preservation of, I think, hopefully, I don't know, a shifting tide about who gets to decide who they are and who gets to decide for them who they will be. And I don't know where that culture war is going to take us in terms of, the really fundamental values of democracy, which are rooted in freedom.
Yeah, I go back to this idea that we touched on earlier about there's this idea that, well, that's not us.
Right.
That's not our problem. I remember in the 60s, and they talked about how as a country, we tend to just flush something down the drain. Like, yeah, well, that's not us. That just get that. Except the drains are backing up, and only when you start looking at it and you go, wow, this has a lot of things to going back to unpack. There's a lot of reasons things are happening, and we get so much information these days, Kimberly. It's easy to say it's too much, right? So I'm going to put you in this box over here, or I'm going to put you over here, and I don't have to deal with it. Whatever it is, right? It could be our own health. It could be what's going on in our community. Well, that's not really my problem. And at some point, don't you get overloaded with how much information and work there is to be done? How do you maintain your hope through that process? Because clearly you are leading in the Black community. Clearly, as a disruptor, you're having these conversations. How do you hold on to that hope?
I think for me, I imagine that the future requires a real preservation of optimism. And so I try to be really intentional about protecting my sense of optimism. I think for me, I choose to partner with brands and with people who share my same kind of fighting spirit, that all is not lost, and that those of us who feel called to be, good stewards of other people and of the planet. I think that that's been really helpful. And I think for me, the people who are closest to me are all very different. My employees, they represent so many different walks of life, and they teach me so much. Our consumers, our customers are also very richly diverse. So there's so many opportunities for learning and sharing and meaningful connection. And I think that that's what we all want ultimately, is we want a sense of meaningful connection and to be nurtured. And I think that, at Grant Blvd, one of our mantras is that we want to protect a culture of care. And I think that that is completely and totally possible. It's just something that we don't put as a marker for what makes a healthy company and a healthy company culture. This notion of care. And so I think that our consumers are drawn to us because they see how we care for the planet, and then we see how we care for folks who may be criminal systems impacted, how we're trying to create learning opportunities for those folks, and then living wage employment for those folks. And I think that protecting our optimism is one of our most powerful tools in the preservation of just a quality life. So, when I think about, how do we manage all this storming? And I think that it only goes two ways. We drown in pessimism, or we somehow float at the surface, seeking to hold on to a spirit of optimism as our anchor.
That is so brilliant. I love that. I was, of course, everything is personal. My dad is a social activist. He ended up losing his family, got divorced, lost his profession, all sorts of things terrible. And I asked him, was it worth it? Was it worth everything you did? And back in the 90s, he said it wasn't. Too high a cost. Shouldn't have done it. I was like, holy crap. We don't want to hear that. Our warriors should be happy. And the night that Obama was elected, I called him. I said, so was it worth it? And he said it was.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I think that's honest, because too many things, especially, and that was an earlier time, right? I think the market is for us to feel afraid and hopeless. And that's what's happening. When I read the stats the other day, only 1% of the world watches Fox News. Wouldn't you think it's like 95? Only
Are you
5%
serious?
watch MSNBC. But you would think that we are so polarized. That's all we hear, and yet in those moments when you find out a friend has a trans kid and you're like, oh, now it's in my world, right? Now I'm going, oh, well, this is new. And I think when those moments happen, I would think the same for you. We have a choice to learn, or we have a choice to go like, it doesn't fit into my world. I don't have the bandwidth for that, right? And
Right.
able to just say, I'm here to learn something in that moment. I think that's what I take from all the things that you've done. And what would be like your proudest moment so far? Because you're young, you have a lot of fun stuff ahead of you, I know. But at the end of the day, with such a full career, what's your proudest achievement so far besides your daughter? All right, so you got to take your daughter out of there, right? So
I know, because that was totally my go-to. I think it's one of the let's think proud moments. I actually think that getting the award from Black Enterprise Business Disruptor of the Year was a huge moment for two reasons. The first being that, to look at what we're building with Grant Blvd, and to see that as a meaningful lighthouse for how industry disruption could look. This idea of thinking about, living wages and inclusive hiring and workforce development and sustainability as the ways in which the future of business was going to be reorienting itself. And then in Grant Blvd as a symbol of that reorientation was a huge affirmation that what we're doing is resonating. So that was a huge accomplishment in that way. It was also a huge sign of success that people who, thinking about, again, the city of Philadelphia, you said that stat in the beginning, 43% Black, less than 3% of businesses owned by Black folk, even fewer owned by women. I think that idea that this national organization that has been trying to figure out how to preserve life after the destruction of Black Wall Street, that they could see our survival and our success as a marker of again, a source of optimism, that there would be a continuing tide of businesses that would be moving towards everything that we still hold true to be in the potential of America, of equality and equity and inclusion and access and aspiration, and sustainability. And from a business perspective, was a great sign that we were doing things that communities that are so far away that it was reaching them is huge.
Wasn't that what Oprah said? The number one thing we all want to know is just to be seen.
Yeah.
I mean, what you're showing is green shoots of optimism. That's
right.
That's why we're on this call. That's why we're doing this today, because it's like, oh, that's where it's happening. Instead of going into that fear and, I deal with it every day. Brick and mortar's dead. The malls are all dying. No one will ever work and read. Oh my, it's like, shut up. There's people out there that are really doing it. You're the ones who are showing us the way and can say, wow, this is it. So we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. Hey, it's Bob again. I'm not only your host, but also the founder of the SalesRx online retail sales training program. How many sales that should have been yours walked out your front doors today? With shoppers being more discerning about where and when they shop, you need to convert more lookers to buyers. And SalesRx is the perfect solution to make training memorable. It's bite-sized, it can fit easily into your schedules. Don't tell me you don't have time to train. If you can give them time to take a break, you have time for them to train. Now, the training builds from some of the quickest ways to engage shoppers to the most advanced. Everything is planned so you can implement your sales training program with a click of a button. And there's a reason we're on 4 continents training thousands, because SalesRx is scalable. Everybody learns the same new skills that will grow your sales. In fact, 83% of users report a double-digit increase in their sales within 6 months. Wouldn't you like that to be your story? Visit SalesRx to learn more and set up a call with me to see how we can help. That's SalesRx.com. Now back to the broadcast. All right, we're back with Kimberly McGlonn, CEO and founder of Grant Blvd and Black Ivy Thrift in West Philly. So I love your idea how to figure out to elevate and amplify thoughtful partnerships. So what kind of dope pieces did you create for the Philadelphia soccer team?
Oh, the union. They were so much fun to work with. They were thinking about, as a lot of companies are, what are their sustainability liabilities, right? So how are they managing things like waste? And for them, they had an amazing season in 2022. For those of you who follow soccer, they made it to the championships. And, and as a part of that, they decorated these blocks away from Philadelphia City Hall with these beautiful banners. And they were thinking about, what are we going to do with this story of preserving that moment and commemorating it, but also demonstrating that as a professional soccer team, where we are thinking about our liabilities for the planet. And so they reached out and we worked out this really clever design concept where we would take those banners, deconstruct them, and then reimagine them into new pieces. And so my design team came up with some really fresh bucket hats for the team and some toiletry bags for them for game days as commemorative pieces, yes, but also as a way of like really kind of putting their flag in the sand that they wanted to figure out how to partner with a local maker and to just show their solidarity with a sustainable green future. So it was great. The team was great, beautiful organization. It was one of those really fun, special collaborations for sure.
Well, I'm sure you're going to have more of those. That's for sure. So, a lot of people listen to this and everybody talks about side hustles now, right? I was speaking to a group the other day and this young man looked at my shoes and he's like, "Oh, Cole Haan." I like, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh, I could probably get $120. I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Oh yeah, on my weekends I go and I shop for people and that's how I make my side hustle." I was like, "Wow, dude." He goes, "Oh yeah, I'm only in men's footwear right now, but eventually I'm going to go into apparel." I was like, I love that.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give aspiring entrepreneurs looking to start a sustainable and socially conscious business like you've done? What are some of the things that you've learned or some I would just say more than just advice, but inspiration? What would you tell them, to those who are listening?
I would tell those of you who are listening to think about the places where you come from and where you care about, and to build a business that, yes, centers sustainability, but that also thinks about impact. There are people in the places where you grew up. There are people in the places where you live. There are causes that need your unique lens, your very personal time and attention. So I would say, yes, build a company that thinks about the planet and its resources, but build one that sits at the intersection of something you care deeply about. It could be, thinking about how to show up for women who are struggling with domestic violence because that's personal for you, or children who are navigating childhood abuse because that's personal for you. We each have these pain points in our stories that I think if we look at them differently are actually lighthouses for how we can do some really beautiful work. So wherever you're building, whatever that side hustle is, I want to encourage you. I want to invite you. I want to empower you to think about how can you give a percent of your revenue to one of those causes? How can you amplify nonprofits where you live and work or play, and the work that they do in a way that helps to get them the resources that they need to show up where they want to show up in ways that you really believe in. I think our businesses, whether they are permanent structures or side hustles that we're really trying to love on into main hustles, that they're made better when they are really connected to things that have once hurt us and to the good that we want to see in the world, and really kind of watering and giving some light to those places that have once been really places of darkness and hardship for us.
I love that. I think that's great. And I think that's probably what informed your 19 years as weren't you an English teacher? Wasn't that it?
I was an English teacher for 20 years.
It's funny. I remember when I was at high school and I went to Pasadena and I was going to help tutor people, and they've said, "Oh, young women and young kids," and I was like, "Oh, you mean like Dick and Jane book?" She goes, "Yeah, no one ever used that again. Why would you even say that?" It was like, I have no idea what's going on, and I think that's a challenge we have generationally.
Yeah.
That in my generation, George Washington, I cannot tell a lie. And then you realize, like, oh dear God, there is so much of a history we never learned. And then you go forward and you say, but what's happening now that I'm not learning?
Right. And
Right.
that is about a commitment to discovery. Like a life well lived is a life of, I think about these two words of wondering and wandering. And I think that when we wonder, we ask these questions, why, how, who, where, when. And when we wander through the pursuit of that acquisition of new knowledge, we experience discomfort. That's a part of learning. Learning is moving into the zone of what is unfamiliar, right? Learning requires discomfort, but there's no growth without it. And there's no real well lived life without growth. And so I think really what I hope people continue to think about is, how do I live a life that is fuller, that is richer, that is more colorful, recognizing that that is the whole point of the adventure, is the pursuit of that.
I'd love this conversation to continue for hours, but you've said who we shop with matters.
Yes.
Can you expand on that for us a little bit?
Yes. Someone said to me once, the loudest vote in a room or voice in the room is $1, right? Like that's the one that really, ultimately, the one that moves everything else is the dollar. And I think that, who we shop with in terms of what do they care about, how are they centering, the well-being of all of us, that is a huge shift in terms of how do we shore up the American economy? How do we reshore some of those jobs that were lost with globalization? How do we improve the quality of life for folks so that we can drive down crime by driving down poverty? There's a way to really solve so many of the social issues that we're all, observing or even feeling very personally. And so much of that is addressing poverty. So shopping with a brand, right, that's thinking about producing locally, going out of your way, right? This is where we're choosing timing over convenience to support local companies to wander into those brick and mortars. It's going to make a huge difference in the well-being of our schools, the well-being of the landscapes when we're walking down the street. And I think that so much of that goes back to that question of, who you shop with and what they care about, and knowing your makers. And that's an old kind of sentiment, but I think that the future is really dependent on our ability to recalibrate and to really make sure that we're spending a significant portion of our dollars and being mindful of how do we support small, how do we support local, how do we support sustainable brands.
And by doing that, lifting up these other people who are just like us, looking for hope in a
Yeah,
world that
yeah,
says be hopeless, right?
yeah, yeah. I think that's true. But I also think, for people who shop at Grant Boulevard or come into Blk Ivy, which are both brick and mortars, this is a love story of Philadelphia, really adding to the wonderful fabric of this city of first. It's, how do I wear something where I walk into a room, people know my values based on what I'm wearing? When you wear Patagonia or when you wear, Everlane, right, as two examples, people have a sense of what you care about. And for me, when people wear Grant Boulevard, I want there to be that same point of conversational pride, that I am very open and excited about supporting a woman-owned brand, a Black-owned brand, a brand that, does the things that are caring about the things that I care about the most too.
I know. I started going, I'm wearing Ted Baker. That doesn't say anything about sustainability.
It doesn't. It says something about maybe your affinity for London, for British style.
I like floral prints. That's all I could tell you.
That's that, or that. We're going to work on that, Bob. I'm going to get you something.
All right. Well, hey, you are amazing. And I love your website. One thing that when I was looking at it yesterday, and I said, these are confident people. That's the thing that I came off. These are confident, know who they are. They are taking that picture as an embodiment of who they are, not like, oh, let's just show the shirt. And I appreciate about their brand. So just because I have to let you go at some point, you have businesses to run and people to inspire. How can established retailers incorporate change into their business? Because you must have these conversations there in West Philly, who people say, "Yeah, but that's you. I could never," right? Or what would be an example, particularly in the business model, right? Because you have, I think you have about a dozen people that work with you. So understanding that you're going to hire someone that might be incarcerated or trans or look different or be a different value, as you said, is scary. You have to let go of a lot. But what do you have to embrace to be able to become a disruptor of business, do you think?
That's such a beautiful framing and a beautiful question, Bob. I think so much of it is really challenging hierarchies that suggest that one way of being is at the top. And when you move into this idea that everyone deserves dignity, because essentially in our humanness we are equal, it deflates this sense that my culture, my language, my diction, my tone, my way of dressing, my way of communicating through body language is at the center of existence. And that sense of ego-led hierarchy is what makes being actually an effective, and when I say effective, I mean like compelling leader, impossible. Compelling leaders recognize that the America that not the one that we dream of, the one that we live in, is predicated on a notion of hierarchy, and that toxicity makes people, that's not how you retain talent. That's not how you cultivate talent. And losing talent it's capital inefficient. So the goal is to say there are many ways of being, and our experiences are all compounded by trauma. How can we make sure that everyone who works within this organization feels that their dignity is being honored? And I think that is that's a cultural shift that leads to, really compelling business design and organization and function.
Yeah. I mean, this is a master class, in case you haven't realized it yet. This is a master class in what it is to be an entrepreneur, to be an educator, to be an enlightened parent and a leader in the community by having these, I don't think they're even uncomfortable. I just think they're unfamiliar conversations, right?
That's exactly what it is. They're unfamiliar. But the more you really, I think there's a decision that on a personal level as a business leader, that you want to lead, you want to succeed, and success is about leadership. And so you have to decide you want to succeed. And if in fact you want to succeed, then that's going to be completely incumbent upon your ability to be nimble and to pivot and to model the kind of personal, inner evaluation that you want to have other people do in your care as a leader of a corporation. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to recruit talent. And in this day and age, you are not going to be able to keep your people. So it's just making the decision. And what is my dream for this business? Are we thriving or not? Because thriving suggests that you are going to stand in a different position of clarity around you working on you so that you can help other people figure out how to add to what it is that you're building.
I love that. I think that's excellent. Well, the last question I ask all of my guests is, tell me something good about retail, Kimberly.
Something really good about retail is that people really are actually excited about the idea that we're going to make it, that the retail landscape is not on its last leg. They're just looking for new kinds of experiences. And that means that, that what's good about retail is that we have an opportunity to be curating cultural spaces that become, national destinations for adventure and exposure and community. And that is now that's the new call for retail leaders. And I think that for people who are excited about those things, the future is bright.
Well, you've been generous with your time today, my friend, and I have so appreciated the leadership you're giving America and young people, and making us aware of fashion is the start of a conversation.
Indeed,
so thanks for joining me today, Kimberly.
Thank you for having me, Bob.
You've been listening to Tell Me Something Good About Retail with Bob Phibbs, the Retail Doctor. As a listener, you can receive free information and guides when you visit retaildoc.com and sign up for our exclusive weekly newsletter. Thanks for being with us. Remember to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you like to get your podcasts. To virtually bring Bob to all of your crew and associates, check out www.salesrx.com.